I'd like to thank Bishop Tobin for organizing this and the Office of Faith Formation. It's been great. Can you guys hear me? Hello. If I yell into it? Okay, good. Yeah, just tell me. If you can't hear me, just tell me. It's been great getting to know Bill and Ed and Alan as this thing has been organized. So what I'm going to do is explain what Catholic social teaching is. So the first two talks from Saturday, were some of you there on Saturday? Okay. Those were very philosophical, and they were great. And Dr. Pecknold began, as you may recall, in 600 BC with the pre-Socratic philosophers. I'm going to begin in the late 1800s AD here. So you have a handout there. And this is a typical type of handout that I use in my classes. I'm going to follow Ed's lead and read some quotes to you as I go through. And you can read along the quotations with me. And the idea, as Ed said, of my talk is to express the principles of Catholic social teaching and where Catholic social teaching even came from. And then Alan and I were speaking beforehand, and he's going to give some really concrete, some shocking examples of what you could call our violations of Catholic social teaching around the world. And hopefully we'll see by combining those what we should be doing. Okay? All right. So if you look at the handout, it says on the top there, what is Catholic social teaching? And I have a few little headings there. The foundation of Catholic social teaching is the person, the dignity of the human person. Pope Paul VI says, the whole man and every man. And the other foundation of Catholic social teaching is the family. You probably heard the phrase, the family is the basic building block of the common good or of a healthy society. And people sometimes wonder, why does the church say that? I found a beautiful passage in John Paul II's letter to families that he wrote in 1994. It's paragraph 13. And he says that the reason why the family is the basic building block of a healthy society is because of the intensity of the bonds of love which happen between the members of the family, both the nuclear family and the extended family. And so the idea is that the intensity of those bonds of love, the people from a family go out into the world with that love in their hearts, and it helps them to relate to others and help the world. That's why. And by the way, if you look that up, Letter to Families, paragraph 13, and you read the rest of it, he has a very startling comment on broken families. And we all come from different forms of dysfunction, and God can heal us and so forth, and there's mercy. But he explains that broken families do damage in society. John Paul II says this because of the angst, you could say, that the people from them bring with them out. It was a really clear explanation of why the family is the foundation of a healthy society. It's because it's its first school of love. Okay. The goal, I say there, of Catholic social teaching is what's called the common good. And I'm going to explain the common good a little bit more in a minute. Although maybe I'll just do it right now. This idea, I am going to go back to BC days. Aristotle. Aristotle said that there's the individual good, contested goods, and the common good. The individual good is, well, for Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, it's you becoming virtuous and happy, getting a healthy soul. That's the individual good. Now, contested goods are goods which, when used, get used up, like a pie. If we had a pie here, and one of you wanted half of it, the rest of us would necessarily have to have a lot smaller pieces. A common good is a good which, when used, grows. It doesn't shrink. Sounds counterintuitive. Some examples are things like love and kindness and so forth. Charity. But the example of a common good that Catholic social teaching is talking about If you turn it over, I might not do the quotes in order, so let's look at quote 3 on the other side. It's from Pope Benedict, his letter Caritas in Veritate. He wrote that one, that's an encyclical. Pope Benedict wrote that in 2009. And the reason he wrote Caritas in Veritate was because of the 2008 subprime mortgage crash that almost destroyed the whole world economy. So all of these social encyclicals are responses to things that are happening in the world. What the church wants to do is participate by offering her millennia of wisdom. That's why he wrote Caritas in Veritate. Well, in this paragraph 7, he talks about the common good. He says, another important consideration is the common good. To love someone is to desire that person's good and to take effective steps to secure it. Besides the good of the individual, there is the good that is linked to living in society, the common good. It is the good of all of us, made up of individuals, families, intermediate groups who together constitute society. The people who belong to the social community, and this is the important point, can only really and effectively pursue their good within it, within the common good. Before I continue the quote, one of the examples I give to the students to explain the common good is, I say that the university is a common good. And the purpose of a common good is to help all the individuals in it to flourish. That's the reason for a common good. And as the Pope just said, you can't flourish unless you're a part of a common good. And sometimes I do some fun things with the students on this. I say, so think about everybody that's here. We have the students, we have the professors, we have the administrators, we have the cafeteria with the cooks, we have the coaches, we have all the different people at the university. We have the dormitories. And all of those people, not just the students, all of them are getting to flourish. The cooks get to get a salary, and they like cooking, and they can support their family. I tell the students, if you had your books alone on a desert island, or on an island, you wouldn't learn as much as you would here, because you have people to help you who've read the books before, you can talk to each other about it, so on and so forth. And then I say, why do you think there's Miley, that's the name of the cafeteria, or dormitories? Why are those there? And they're scratching their heads. And the reason is because with the time that you are not cooking or traveling to where you sleep, and I hold up a book, you can read Aristotle. That's why. That's why those are there. So that's a good example of a common good. Now look at the rest of the quote. To take a stand for the common good is on the one hand to be solicitous for, and on the other hand to avail oneself of that complex of institutions that give structure to the life of society, juridically, civilly, politically, and culturally, making it the polis or the city. The more we strive to secure a common good corresponding to the real needs of our neighbors, the more effectively we love them. So we're supposed to derive the benefits from it for our own individual flourishing, and we're all supposed to participate in making the common good be a true common good. Okay, so that's the common good. If you turn it back over to the other side, you'll see that I list the principles, and the common good I just described, and there's one called the universal destination of goods. That's going to be the most important principle today for both of our talks, I think. And private property, subsidiarity, solidarity, work, transcendence. I'm going to explain those as we proceed here. Now, history. So strictly speaking, beginning with Leo XIII, okay, so he's the Pope at the end of the 1800s, a little bit into the 1900s. He wrote an encyclical letter called Rerum Novarum. It means of new things. And that, now he wrote some ones that are less famous than Rerum Novarum before it. So strict scholars would say it started earlier than Rerum Novarum. But most people say Catholic social teaching the beginning of it crystallizes around this encyclical Rerum Novarum from 1891. That's when he wrote it. And then many popes have elaborated on that encyclical, all the way up, as we've already heard, to Pope Francis's Laudato Si. And as I said before, the encyclicals are written to respond to real things that are happening in the world. And I'm going to, in a minute, say why Leo wrote Rerum Novarum. But if you just look down where it says some primary magisterial texts, I listed all of them. That's not all of them, but those are the main, what are called social encyclicals. And I have their dates there, and the Pope who wrote them, and the English translation. So the first words of encyclical are always Latin, and those are the first words on the first line. That's what they get the title. So they write it so that the first couple words of the line will be a cool title. That's what the popes do. That's how you, all right. Now, so those ones, and so one of the things that I want to say, and maybe some of you already do this, and I try to do this. Now I'm a professor, so I also have to, but when I teach medical students in the summer with the Catholic Medical Association, I have a list like this of the bioethical encyclicals of the popes. And I always encourage them as they go through their life as doctors to every year or so reread these. Let them become part of your thinking and part of your way of relating to people. These are full of such rich thoughts. It's unbelievable. It's like we were talking, it's like the best kept secret of the Catholic Church, the social encyclical tradition. It's so sad that we don't know it. So these are worth reading over and over again. If you haven't read these, they're all great. I would recommend starting with Deus Caritas Est, the 2005 one down there, God is Love. It's a little bit shorter, and it's the most beautiful. I don't want to be mean to the other popes, but I find it very, very beautiful. And it has some rich passages about justice and charity in there, so it does fit into the social encyclical tradition. It also has some beautiful passages about the love between man and woman, and it's very nice. So those are those. Okay. Well, now let's look at why did Leo XIII write Rerum Novarum, and why did that kick off this tradition of social encyclicals in 1891? And I should say, obviously, even though I'm saying Catholic social teaching started in 1891, it really started with the Incarnation and Christ's teaching, and it's all of it's rooted in Scripture and rooted in the fathers of the Church and the apostles and the doctors of the Church. But you can say that it crystallizes, the social teaching of the Church does crystallize in this tradition, rooted in our whole tradition. So what happened? What happened was the Industrial Revolution. That's what happened. And I have a quote that's not here. It's from Laborum Exercens, which is John Paul II's 1981 encyclical on work. I have it listed there. By the way, he wrote that when the Solidarity movement was happening in Poland, to participate in that, to help Lech Walesa. Okay. So in that, in the one on work, John Paul reflects on, he says better than I can say, what was happening in the 1800s. So I'm going to quote John Paul. It's not on the sheet. The great conflict in the age of and together with the industrial development was the conflict that emerged between capital and labor. That is to say, between the small but highly influential group of entrepreneurs, owners, or holders of the means of production, and the broader multitude of people who lacked these means and who shared in the process of production solely by their labor. The conflict originated in the fact that the workers put their powers at the disposal of the entrepreneurs, and these, following the principle of maximum profit, tried to establish the lowest possible wages for the work done by the employees. In addition, there were other elements of exploitation connected with the lack of safety at work, safeguards regarding health, living conditions, workers, children working, and all this, 17, 18-hour days. So that's John Paul describing the horrors of the Industrial Revolution. You think about Charles Dickens or Upton Sinclair, these books that also describe it. Rerum Novarum was written in response to that situation, to try to help. So I'm going to explain it a little bit more, what it says. But first of all, let's look at quote number 1 on the bottom of the sheet, or in order to explain. This one's from one of John Paul's encyclicals, and it says something very interesting. The Church's social doctrine is not a third way between liberal capitalism and Marxist collectivism, nor even a possible alternative to other solutions less radically opposed to one another. Rather, it, the Church's social doctrine, constitutes a category of its own. Nor is it an ideology, but rather the accurate formulation of the results of a careful reflection on the complex realities of human existence in society and in the international order. In the light of faith and the Church's tradition, its main aim is to interpret these realities, determining their conformity with or divergence from the lines of the gospel teaching on man and his vocation, a vocation which is at once earthly and transcendent. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Then he says, so it's a field of theology. Now let me just unpack a little bit of that quote. Up on the top it says liberal capitalism and Marxist collectivism. You know how in America we have these two, capitalism, socialism? Those are the same at root. They're different in lots of ways once you get beyond the root. But they're rooted in this idea of liberal. Unfortunately, the word liberal now means Democrat or progressive left. But the liberal, notice the liberal goes with capitalism. You're like, wait a minute, that's supposed to go with. But, but the reason is because there was a movement of liberalism. It was like a philosophical movement. It had many different parts to it, but one part of it was sort of like individualistic utilitarianism. And the reason why I say, I'm going to make this too simplistic, apologies to Adam Smith, but what I want to say is that capitalism is considered rooted in this liberalism because of the idea that it was thought that if you let greed and the pursuit of profit full bore go free, liberal means free, then that will rise all ships, or the trickle-down economics. It's from that idea. Okay? Now that's false. It looks like it works for a long time. If you read Caritas and Veritate, Pope Benedict says, in another beautiful article that Pope Benedict wrote, I don't have the reference in front of me right now, but if you look at the 2008 subprime mortgage crash, and every single player in that, and we want to have mercy on the poor people who are just trying to get a house, but still, the main motive of everybody was what? Greed. Greed, yes. And it crashed. But it looked like it was great. And Belloc writes about this a lot, how capitalism leads to, in the end, anxiety, fear of losing your job, huge amounts of money, bankruptcy, then it happens again. And so there's this problem built in. And then Marxist and then the socialist. So if you think about the Industrial Revolution, which I read to you about, and the Pope wanted to come in there and speak to that and say, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't be treating the workers like this. Well, the Marxists were trying to I didn't mean that pun, capitalize on that problem by promoting their idea of Marxist collectivism, which means taking private property away from everybody and giving it to the collective, and then everything will be okay. But the collective is a fiction, and it just ends up becoming the government, becomes the big capitalist who oppresses. And so what Pope Leo, I'm going a little bit away from how I was going to do the talk, but it's okay. What Pope Leo says, which is so beautiful, and which is sort of the core point, remember, the encyclicals are not devising an economic system. They say that the lay people, like the things that Alan works on with his colleagues and friends, are lay Catholics trying to get into real life and provide solutions for the local thing to make it a true common good. We're supposed to do that. But what the encyclicals do is they give us the principles to help us do that. Okay? So that's why John Paul says Catholic social teaching isn't a new economic theory, although Chesterton and his friends, they developed Distributism. It's interesting looking at that. That's that. Okay. But what Leo says, so the principle that Leo says in Rerum Novarum is that of friendship or brotherly love, which later gets called the principle of solidarity. And what it means, to put it really concretely, is, and he actually lists these. He lists the temptations of the owners of capital, and he lists the temptations to sin of the workers. And the temptations of the owners are abuse, stealing all the profit, taking advantage of people. The temptations of the workers are envy, anger, resentment. And the way it was set up, it fomented those two. The Industrial Revolution did. And Leo said, we are all brothers and sisters. We're supposed to love each other like a family. And so what he asks is the owners of capital to, and I think this was said before, make sacrifices because you love the people who are working for you and you want them to be able to have enough money to support a family. And Leo even says they should have enough money to have some savings. And then not everyone's going to be a business owner. So the workers have to be grateful, work hard, and so on and so forth. But it's supposed to be a relationship of love, actually. Like you would, like an older brother to a younger brother. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what Leo talked about, not this, which the Industrial Revolution had fostered, okay? Because of this, false view of capitalism, okay. So now quote 2. Maybe I won't read all the quotes so I don't take up too much time. But basically, what quote 2 does, it repeats that the church is not capitalistic or Marxist, or even a third theory. But then, this quote introduces the concept of what's called the universal destination of goods. They should own the land that they work. It's still back in if it was a farm. So that gives you a certain dignity. Owning and work. Work is actually the reason why private property comes into existence, actually. But anyways, that would be a little bit of a longer. So I just want to make the point that the church is in favor of private property. But this concept of the universal destination of goods ranks higher than the principle of private property. That's a critique of capitalism. What does the universal destination of goods mean? It means that, this is a theological way to put it, when God created everything, He created it for everybody. The whole of creation is a gift. That's another thing I do. The whole, actually, not only the whole of creation, the whole meaning of creation is gift. It's pure gift. A lot of times I say at the beginning of some of my philosophy classes, just think for a minute about your own existence. You immediately, if you just sit down and reflect on that, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I did not do this. I didn't make myself. And I didn't even sort of ask to be made. I couldn't, because I didn't exist yet. Your very existence is a complete gift to you. And the whole of creation is like that. And even if you say, well, my parents made me, yes, but their existence is a gift to them. It's also one of the proofs for God. It goes on that. But the whole meaning of the created world, and it has a hierarchy, and the top this is another interesting point. And Pope Francis writes about this in a speech. I remember it was April 15th, but I forget which year, maybe 2015. I have it in here somewhere. But the high point of creation, you know, the 6 days of creation, it's not just mankind. It's the male-female difference in complementarity. Or as my friend from University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, she likes to say, that the woman is the last one created on the way up. So she makes her the highest, which is probably true. But really the highest really is, it's that male-female difference in complementarity, which is in some analogous way an image of the Trinity. Okay? That's the height of creation. That's another reason why the family is the basic building block of society. And why children, you can see this connects to the life issues. The popes now, they say that back then it was the Industrial Revolution. The social issue of our day is primarily the life issues. And that, I'd be tempted to go down another lecture path on that, but this idea that every child has a right, this is a statement in the church's teaching on life issues. Every child has a right, they use the word right, to be conceived in and because of a specific conjugal loving act between his married mother and father. That's the way God made it. Obviously, people get created in all sorts of other ways. And God, like I said before, there's mercy and healing and so forth. What I mean is technological ways, but also people get conceived in rape or incest or adultery. This is even in Jesus' family tree. We have that. All right, it's in the genealogy of Matthew. So, but the point is, it's meant to be that way because a child is also a child is a mysterious, superabundant fruit of the love of his or her parents. That's okay. Okay. So the reason why. So if you in that quote, that quote 2, just about halfway through, a little more than halfway through it says, Christian tradition has. This is from John Paul. Has never upheld this right, it means the right to private property, as absolute and untouchable. On the contrary, it has always understood this right, private property, within the broader context of the right common to all to use the goods of the whole creation. The right to private property is subordinated to the right to common use, to the fact that goods are meant for everyone. So our hyper-capitalistic way of thinking wouldn't like that. So that's a clear statement. The church is not against private property. It is against making it higher than the universal destination of goods. If you look at quote 4 on the back, I'm glad, as I said, I was talking to Alan before, and I think this quote will make a link between our talks. John Paul said, "This then is the picture. There are some people, the few, who possess much, who do not really succeed in being." I'm going to talk about that more later. Because through a reversal of the hierarchy of values, they are hindered by the cult of having. And there are others, the many, who have little or nothing, who do not succeed in realizing their basic human vocation because they are deprived of essential goods. The evil does not consist in having as such, but in possessing without regard for the quality and the ordered hierarchy of the goods one has. Quality and hierarchy arise from the subordination of goods and their availability to man's being and his true vocation. So if I don't have a quote on this point, but in the social teaching, there's always discussions of the meaning of justice. There's all different kinds of justice, and justice has a rich tradition. Thomas Aquinas develops it a lot. Well, the church does call for a just distribution of goods. It doesn't have to be equal, but it does have to be just or fair. I mean, I was thinking about it on the ride up here, how I was going to make this point, and I said, if you think even when a mother says to one of the siblings, share with your brother, that's sort of that. One person's trying to keep everything. And so a just distribution of goods, and I was going to say this before too, there's three basic players in social relations. I don't know if that's the right word, but the state, or the government, is one. The market is another one. And the third one is sometimes called the third group. I forget the exact word for it, but it's the mediating institutions. So it's churches, schools, community groups, the youth groups that Adam's creating. And that's where real human community happens. Neighborhoods, parishes, those are mediating institutions. And some people think that the church says those are the ones that have to do the praying and the social teaching, but the market and the politics should just be free, liberal. But the church's social teaching says that, and it doesn't mean to set up a theocracy in the strict sense, but the church's social teaching says explicitly that the state and the market, those two also should be constructed according to these principles. And so there are rules. It is part of Catholic social teaching, as long as you respect the principle of subsidiarity, which means you want the people, the local people, to do the most, because they know the people, they love each other, they know the proper solution, but sometimes you need help from higher, but those ones shouldn't overtake it, then you get a social welfare state. That's a real violation of the principle of subsidiarity. But the church actually is in favor of the higher order, like political systems, intervening when there needs to be even a more just distribution of things. Now, it doesn't work if the politicians are also corrupt. But if they aren't, then it's okay, according to church teaching, to do that. And in fact, it's part of it all. Okay? It's part of it all. All right. So, quote 5 talks about a very interesting phenomenon now that's happening really right now I think in the news even, but it's from 2009. He says, he's quoting Paul VI, who wrote his in 1967. Paul VI reflected on the meaning of politics and the danger constituted by utopian and ideological visions. So those two are opposites. In one way, in another way, they're the same, which I'll explain. So utopian and ideological visions. He warned against the technocratic ideology so prevalent today, fully aware of the great danger of entrusting the entire process of development to technology alone. All right? And that quote goes on. So you can't just assume that technology just create a robot to fix everything. That's bad. That doesn't work. Okay? And then, on the other hand, we are witnessing an upsurge of ideologies that deny in toto the very value of development. The idea of a world without development, if you try to think that way, indicates a lack of trust in man and God. So, idealizing technological progress or contemplating the utopia of a return to humanity's original natural state are two contrasting ways of detaching progress from its moral evaluation and hence from our responsibility. Do you know Thomas Aquinas' definition of the vice of sloth? You might think it's laziness, but it's not. I'm going to paraphrase it a little, but sloth is the feeling of sadness that overcomes you when you realize that being good is difficult. That's sloth. We all know that feeling. All right? And sometimes that feeling makes you lazy, but sometimes it can make you become frenetic in your work and energy to avoid doing the good. So the good takes effort. You have to get to know the local people. You can't, like a lot of UN things, they just want to fly an airplane over and drop $1 billion bills and they think it will fix everything. No. You have to actually get, that causes poverty, believe it or not. You can explain that better than I can. You have to, so those two are both thinking, oh, we're going to go back to the natural state, or a computer will fix everything, are both expressions of sloth, the unwillingness to really help. Now, quote 7, and if I'm going too long, you can stop me, but this is my favorite quote on here. And this is maybe the core idea. So quote 7 is from Caritas in Veritate, number 28. That one, it's quote 6. It's quote 6. Caritas in Veritate, number 36. This is the one. The Church's social doctrine holds that authentically human social relationships of friendship, solidarity, and reciprocity can also be conducted within economic activity, not only outside it or after it. So let me just explain that first sentence a little bit. Economic relationships are human relationships. They are people relating to people. And human relationships should be characterized by friendship, solidarity, reciprocity, and so forth. The reason why he says not only outside it or after it is because the science, or the social science of economics, the way it's taught at most universities, is pretty much reduced to almost like mathematical algorithms, basically. They think they can, like what I was saying before. Economics, some places maybe don't do this, but it's become sort of a mathematical science. And it sort of says, well, ethics is something after you figure out all, and it's good, by the way, to figure out the principles of economics, supply and demand and all that stuff. The church doesn't say, let's stop thinking about that. But don't think that it can be separated, like, internally from morality. Okay, that's what that first sentence means. Now, the great challenge before us, accentuated by the problems of development in this global era and made even more urgent by the economic and financial crisis, and there he really means the one that we just went through in 2008, is to demonstrate in thinking and behavior not only that traditional principles of social ethics, like transparency, honesty, and responsibility, cannot be ignored or attenuated, but also that in commercial relationships, the principle of gratuitousness and the logic of gift as an expression of fraternity can and must find their place within normal economic activity. This is a human demand at the present time, but it is also demanded by economic logic. Let me just break that down a little bit. Those three, transparency, honesty, and responsibility, you may recall after the subprime mortgage thing, all these seminars were put on everywhere about those type of things, business ethics. And he's saying, okay, we got to do that, but really that's not enough. Publishing your accounting sheets is not going to fix this problem of greed. So what could it possibly mean to say the principle of gratuitousness and the logic of gift should be part of normal economic relationships, and then he says at the end, is also demanded by economic logic. So what he means is that if we get these principles of gratuitousness and gift into normal economic relations, that will be good for the economy too. It'll make it more stable, and everyone will benefit from it. Now, a lot of people debate, what does that mean, gratuitousness and gift, in the economy? And it is hard to figure it out. You got to use your imagination a little bit. There's one theologian named David Schindler Sr. who writes about how if you contrast a baker who really is just calculating his ingredients to use the minimum amount of them to make the most profit, and the bread just enough so that people come, versus a mother baking bread, and somehow the love gets right into the bread somehow. And she's not thinking about, and for her, the bread is loved, the family is loved, and for the extreme baker I'm talking about, the everything is the bread and the customer, they're just instruments. They're just instruments. So then some people criticized him, well, how do you get a mother's love into market relationships? Well, you don't impose it. It has to come from people's hearts. And here's, in all these documents, the popes also talk about, okay, I'll stop then, after this point. In all these documents, the popes talk about micro and macro a lot. And so, some of the couple of examples that Alan told me before were macro that have horrible effects on the local. But, and then if you look at it micro, it means, and I think one of your quotes said that, it means changing everybody's individual hearts. Now I told Bill this story, and I was debating, should I say this publicly? I'm going to lose all the grace. But I'm going to tell you something that I did, okay, because of reading these things. And it doesn't mean, it was a little thing, I think. But it was an opportunity for me to check if this is real. So when I lived in Philly, I lived sort of close to the hood, and there was a Boston Market, that chicken place. I like that place, and I would go by it a lot when I was coming back from a certain spot. So I would stop there to get food. And there was a guy there, a really poor guy, missing teeth, at the door. And he had a little backpack, dirty clothes, and he wouldn't say anything. He just smiled and opened the door for the people. That's all he did. So, and I went there somewhat regularly. So one time I said to him, you want some dinner? And he goes, okay. So I went in, and I bought 2 of everything that I was going to get. And I made separate bags, and I put a drink in his, and I gave it to him. And he said, thank you. God bless you. And then he ran around the back of the building. I'm like, where's he going? So I got in my car, and I sort of, when I was leaving, I looked, and there was a dumpster back there, and he had gotten cardboard boxes out, and he made a little table for himself to eat his food. So I did that for that same guy, because he was always there, probably like 4 or 5 more times before I moved up here. And so he knew who I was, and I knew he was. And we didn't develop a real friendship, but it was a friendly, and one time I said, because I always said more or less the same thing, and I remember the 4th or 5th time I said, you want some chicken? And he goes, can you make it meatloaf? And I said, sure. So that little story, okay, I tried, because I study this stuff, I said I better try to do something in my life that is according to this. And that little story, the joy that happened, it's a little joy between me and that guy in our hearts, and a little smile, but somehow that, I think, is what he means by the logic of gratuitous and gift. It's supposed to be in normal economic relations. And I had to spend 2 amounts of money, but so like a business owner could give up their profit for the whatever. Okay, the end. Thank
you. It seems to be an ongoing theme that from the talks on Saturday and then into your talk, I think that the root of what you're trying to get at is we need virtue.
Yeah.
Because a classic understanding of virtue is something that is ordered towards what's truly good for us. That ties into, so there's no pill, there's no robot that can be forced upon us to do the common good.
Right.
We need to live virtue as a society, generosity, chastity, charity, first and foremost charity, and perhaps that the building of virtue, starting in the home, like you said, is the place. I don't know if you want to comment there.
That's a great point, and what Aristotle also connects to what you just described is happiness, a deep happiness that can come even in the midst of suffering. can be dwelling in you because of that virtue. And since you say that, from the last talk, remember someone was saying on Saturday about starting with children, and in addition to virtue, we because this is a Catholic gathering, it has to be prayer. It has to be rooted in prayer, like an actual prayer life. Like your heart has to know Jesus. You have to know God, which means spending time with God. Like you can't, I'm amazed every time I read people like Socrates, and they put Christians to shame, actually, with their level of virtue, and they didn't even have the sacraments. So you can be virtuous even if you're not a believer and all that. I'm not saying atheists are by nature unvirtuous. However, to really do all this, I think it has to be rooted in a prayer life, individual prayer life and communal prayer life and liturgical prayer life. And little
the
children.
prayer can help with what you were saying about sloth too, to
sloth.
realize that it's something difficult that
Yeah.
can help you to make the decisions. Does anybody else want to ask any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to ask you whether the CEO of Nestle's is committing a sin when he says water is not a human right.
I don't know this. She said, I got to repeat your question. She said, is the CEO of Nestle's committing a sin when he says water is not a human right? Now, not being God or a mind reader, I can't answer whether he's committing a sin because you've got to have also the subjective. But yes, water is water is a human right. It is. So if someone were willfully, water is one of the main things of the universal destination of goods. So, but I can't comment on that particular person's state of his soul. But you can judge someone's actions, and if somebody is making it hard for people to get water, then that's a violation of the subordination of private property to the universal destination of goods.
Then I was hoping that would be your answer.
Yes,
If
that's
it is your answer, then my question is, why is it that if some woman stands up and says abortion is a human right, you get a chorus of outcry from the church saying, bad, bad, bad. But if the CEO of Nestle stands up and says, water is not a human right, which he has done, and which has been quoted in all the media, the church says nothing.
You can comment.
I can comment. So water is necessary to survive. Abortion is not. And what is an abortion? What happens in an abortion? Right. What happens when there are two different acts.
My dear man,
That's
you
why.
don't have to talk to me.
Yeah, she knows.
No, I know.
She hears you.
No, that you asked the question.
No,
so-
but you haven't answered my question. Why?
Which one?
My question is not, is denying that water is a human right wrong, just like
Yeah.
having an abortion is wrong. I want to know why you get the church always publicly saying abortion is wrong,
Well,
but that I have
okay,
never heard
gotcha.
the church say
I
publicly
gotcha.
Gotcha.
that
I
the
misunderstood
CEO
your
of
question.
Nestle is wrong when he
Yeah, yeah.
says water is not a human right.
Yeah.
I guess what I would say, first of all, it's a great question, and I might even push your whole point even further, and maybe you would agree with me. I actually don't think we have the church saying abortion is wrong. I don't think, at least we have groups that are, that are helping pregnant women and so forth, but we, you got to be careful. I don't want to be like a bishop basher and all that, but we all have to work better at it. But I would say that on both of those points, here's what I would say. Just like I told you all, and when I said it to you, I was saying it to me also, that we should regularly read the social encyclicals so they become part of our natural thinking. And I do wish that, and I know a lot of great priests, and I love priests, but I do wish that homilies would be more informed by the beautiful richness of these encyclicals, including the point you make. And since you make that point, this is really beautiful. I'm agreeing with you, but look, this is really amazing. Look at quote 7 on the handout. So before I start reading it, I will make a term for you. It's called human ecology. Human ecology. And Benedict, Francis, and John Paul all talk about it. So this is one from Benedict. He says, openness to life is at the center of true development. When a society moves towards denial or suppression of life, it ends up no longer finding the necessary motivation and energy to strive for man's true good. If personal and social sensitivity towards the acceptance of a new life is lost, then other forms of acceptance that are valuable for society also wither away. The acceptance of life strengthens moral fiber and makes people capable of mutual help. By cultivating openness to life, wealthy peoples can better understand the needs of poor ones. They can avoid employing huge economic and intellectual resources to satisfy the selfish desires of their own citizens. Instead, they can promote virtuous action within the perspective of production that is morally sound and marked by solidarity, respecting the fundamental right to life of every people and every individual. So, the concept of a human ecology in the writings of the popes, especially the Francis, Benedict, and John Paul, says that the reason why we're destroying the environment, or at least one of the main reasons why, is because in the hierarchy of creation, the human being is the height of it. It doesn't mean the other stuff is bad. The other stuff is good. Every day, good, good, good. But if we destroy ourselves, we're going to lose. That makes it easy for us not to care about the things less than us. So they're integral. Yeah, they're integral. But if we, and actually Dr. Pecknold said last time, he brought up contraception, how toxic, especially the female forms of contraception are, the pill and Depo-Provera and all that. You're taking something to wreck a beautiful system called the fertility system. And it also wrecks the fish he talked about. I don't know if you heard about that in the news. But so the whole thing is this hyper-consumerism that we live in, and all of us do, and we're probably not fully aware of it. We actually treat like our own bodies as commodities. And so that's why we also say things like water isn't a human right. If a pro-life person would probably say to you, if we could get the life issue correct, that would be true trickle-down. We would start to respect all of God's creation more. That's what Benedict's quote means. But however, I agree with you that we do need speaking on, and that's what Aaron does so well, on those type of issues. Why aren't we treating each other like brothers and sisters? So,
Peter, do you think, I think we're starting, and it's taken a while for sure, that's a valid point. It's taken a while for the U.S. bishops to comment on more of these issues, and they're starting, though, to make public statements on these things that we're talking about. So that's a valid point. Sorry.
It's taken more than a while. What is happening that's taking a while?
That's a good question.
I think there's probably, we quoted.
You don't know.
No, I agree with you. That's frustrating, I think, for all the people who are concerned about all the social issues. We're wondering, what are you talking about? Talk about this stuff. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Any other? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think there was one back there, and then we'll go in order. You'll wait? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the bishops have spoken out. I mean, the nuclear weapons, for instance, and that filters to the people. Unless you're, like we are, basically concerned about these issues, but you never hear anything from the pulpit about any of this.
So that's what I meant before.
It's not like they haven't spoken about it. I think they have.
Well,
but it's not filtered.
Right. I'll comment on my own thought on that, even though I'm being videoed. Okay, you can publish it. So she said, to repeat the question, that the bishops have spoken. They issue all these statements. They're on their website. She didn't put it that way, but that's what she meant. They're on there. Nobody reads that.
Right.
And then she said, what about the pulpit? And so what I think would be good would be, I'm just repeating myself, but it goes with what you say, maybe bishops should direct their local priests, meet with them and say, hey, let's read an encyclical together. I want you guys to incorporate this into your homilies. Let's get real with people about this stuff and not just, there's a lot of, even Pope Francis, remember? He said, stop giving boring homilies. That was one of the first things he said. So I think what I would like would be if priests would ponder these things and then work them into meaningful homilies.
And
So
we can bring that as the laity. We can bring that to our priest's attention too, and we should. And I'm happy to say that my pastor very frequently talks about the social.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones.
There seems to be, and for quite some time now, but getting increasingly worse, hostility towards people that say that anything is wrong. And so that has gotten into the church. And there was a guild day recently where Father Sullivan got up and said, we have to stop not saying anything because it's not helping.
Right.
There are less and less people in the church.
Right.
We have to tell the truth now.
Right.
You
And
know?
the ones that are growing are
Right.
the ones that are, with charity,
Right.
telling the truth. Those are the ones that people get attracted to. Yeah.
That Human Life Guild Day was on domestic violence.
It
and
was,
that's part of it,
yeah.
Which is a
Bill?
I have a question, a selfish question probably, but I also want to say that, just following up that conversation, it's a beautiful reminder of what Bishop Toll were trying to do by hoping that, to remind us that these issues are not isolated.
Right.
And Benedict, if I can quote it,
Please do.
and I have it at the bottom of my blog, one of my favorite quotes from Benedict is, our duties toward the environment are linked to our duties toward the human person. So what the popes are trying to do, and many bishops are trying to do, is remind us that we are brothers and sisters, and these issues, while some of us might have capacity for one more than another to deal with one or the other, they're all united, and I think your talk has been so helpful for me. I don't know if you saw me, but I think I'm going to have to go to the chiropractor. I was nodding my head so often every time you were saying something.
Well,
So
that's
thank you.
great.
So my question
Yes.
is, a lot of times it seems that there's a discussion from the church, like, so the state market and the church, say, mostly is in the middle. So a lot of the social encyclicals is it fair that they're more focused on the market, or was that just the discussion you were having? So as a government employee, what would the church be saying to government in terms of building up the common good? You made a comment that it helps
Yes.
that the politicians are not corrupt.
Well,
Could you just elaborate on that? That's obviously near and dear to me.
yeah, I mean, first thing I'll say is that's a deep question, and you could have actually, a whole course on the relationship between the church and the state. And the second thing I want to say is I can't say I'm an expert on that particular question, but the point I made, in a text that I forgot to mention out loud, but it's on here, is the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. That's less known than the Catechism of the Catholic Church, but it's a book built exactly like the Catechism, with paragraphs just like the Catechism, but it's the Catechism of the Social Encyclicals. And there's a section in there, and I can't remember the section numbers, and if you email me, if you can't find it, I can give it to you, because I used to teach it. Where it explains the answer to that, the market, the state, and the mediating institutions. And now, so the comment that I made in this talk was just to say that a lot of American conservatives think that if the state gets involved in a just distribution of things, that's anathema. But that isn't Catholic. The Catholic Church says that the market and the state should also be informed by the ethos that happens when you learn this stuff. And that's when Pope Benedict says, he used to write about, I think before he became Pope, he got it from Toynbee, I think, creative minorities. And what he meant by that was that when the surrounding culture sees a group of practicing Christians who really love their faith and live it. And sometimes it happens like a group of people will see a bunch of families with a lot of children, which isn't common. And then they start to think, I want to have a lot of children too. Because they see that. So that happens sometimes. And so it doesn't mean that in order for a society to have a true common good based on this stuff, the church isn't saying everyone has to be Catholic. But there does have to be people, to quote Benedict again, who make God credible. What he means by that is, if we live like this, or even form a family restaurant or a business that is according to these principles, other people will see that. Maybe it will cause them to convert, great. But it can influence the culture and be a leaven to the common good.
Yeah, people, they're reasonable because a lot of what you're describing is based off of natural law.
Common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People can arrive at.
So much common sense in here, it's amazing. Yes?
I appreciate the publication of the encyclicals because largely I have not paid a lot of attention to them,
Yeah.
to be honest,
Yeah.
until Laudato Si,
Okay.
to be honest. And I think for what Bill has been saying, we've had a couple conversations over the last couple of weeks, that I do found Laudato Si is to be a very unifying piece, and I really appreciate that the connection to the other encyclicals. I really do appreciate that because I do think since the industrial age, there is a modern world problem that we haven't got our hands around yet, if you will. And I guess one of my questions from a practical point of view is, are there any model countries or communities that would represent a just distribution of goods in that sense? You know, and I'm all about local action, but I am very interested if there is a model
here's what I would
that
say.
approaches it.
I would say, first of all, I bet Alan is going to have better answers to that question than I do. You can find little examples of it around. Like I mentioned before, little family restaurants that really have a lot of love in it and they're fair to their employees, things like this. Or, now one, you might want to look this up since you're interested in that. There's something called Distributism. And sometimes I wish it wasn't called that because it sounds like it might be socialism.
Yeah.
But Distributism was the name for a theory of economics that G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc and these guys. Are you familiar with that already?
I know a little
In the
bit.
Distributist Review, and if you read Belloc's book, Economics for Helen, it's called Economics for Helen.
For
Helen, the girl's name Helen, yeah. That can give you a really good introduction to
For example, in northern Spain, Madrigal.
Madrigal, that's what I was going to say. So a lot of the distributists like to talk about this company Madrigal in Spain. It's a big company making lots of money, and they try to build it on distributist principles. Like one of the principles, if I remember correctly, is that the highest paid employee in that company is not allowed to make more than 8 times the lowest paid. They build that into their bylaws. So that's forcing, by law, a just distribution. So distributists, a lot of them like to point to that Spanish company and say, study that. There's some critiques of it too, but it's a great question. Like, where can you find people living this way? The Shire.
Some had better homes in the
I think 1 then 2.
On a larger scale, are the Scandinavian countries
Yeah,
models for that?
that's what
How come you didn't mention them?
Yeah, people
They're
do.
a major
Thank you very much.
presence in the world.
Yeah, I was thinking in my head of saying something like Denmark.
Oh, yeah.
Now you could. There's no perfect one, but yes, some of the distributists like to point to those countries and look at features of them that do exhibit this. Okay, there's some other problems with them, but yes, I agree with you. Thank you. I was thinking that and I didn't say it. Yes.
To follow up, before the Industrial Revolution,
Yes.
Catholic culture, many times, the villages revolved around the church.
Right.
It was the center of the heart.
Yeah.
In a business, the owner would give more to a fellow who had 5 kids
Right,
than
right.
someone only had 1.
Right, and the
Doing the
guilds.
same job.
Yes, and the guilds, and another thing that, as you're talking, pops into my head, if you really look into colonial American towns, they actually lived according to these principles. So,
Yeah, we want to make sure, yeah.
you can wrap
So, yeah, thank you for your.